I'm Mara Ellis, and at 32, I've built a life I once thought only existed on the other side of grit. I'm a senior analytics lead in Austin, Texas, messy whiteboard walls, sprint reviews that run past dinner, a paycheck that would have stunned my younger self. It's miles from the girl who learned to count change in a pawn shop parking lot while her father juggled overdue notices like hot coals. When I was 9, my world folded in half. My mother, Renee Carter, packed a suitcase and left our little rental outside Erie, Pennsylvania. One minute she was there, humming over the kettle. The next, she was a tail light disappearing down a wet road. Dad, Daniel Ellis, who could fix anyone's brakes but not a broken promise, said she'd found a different path. That path included a new husband and later a son named Landon. For me and Dad, it meant winters in a drafty house that whistled, secondhand coats that never quite zipped all the way up, and a kind of silence you can feel in your teeth. I worked, I studied. I turned myself into a person who could read a balance sheet and also an empty fridge. I climbed until the climb became the habit. I thought I had outrun that old ache. Then, one October evening, someone knocked on my apartment door, and the past stepped in like it had a key. When I opened it, there she was, Renee, with a smile lacquered on so tight it might crack, and beside her, Landon, my half-brother, all cheekbones and attitude, hoodie strings slapping a designer t-shirt. It had been 2 decades since I'd seen her up close. 100 rehearsed speeches evaporated. "Mara," she breathed, arms out. "Look at you!" I didn't hug her. Landon gave me a nod without looking up from his phone, then drifted into my living room like he owned the deed. Renee made admiring noises at my place, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the plant I'd kept alive a whole year, the view of the Frostbank Tower like a shard of blue sugar. She asked about work without listening for answers. Then she cut to it, voice shifting into a tone I recognized from my childhood, the one that says the decision has been made, and you are the resource. "I heard you're doing very, very well," she said, and the way she lingered on felt like a hand in my pocket. Landon's been accepted to Riverton University. Tuition is a lot. $58,000 the first year, once you add fees and housing. We were hoping you'd help. Her smile was steady and hungry. Something modest, $2,800 a month would keep us afloat. Landon finally glanced up. "Nice place," he said, shading his eyes theatrically at the skyline. "Kinda small for, a big tech paycheck." He dropped onto my couch, sneakers on the coffee table. "You could do better." There it was, the entitlement that didn't even blush. I felt my mouth go dry. What I'd wanted, some version of my mother that apologizes first, was not coming. "I need time to think," I said, and Renee's smile frayed at the edges. Landon muttered stingy under his breath like it was punctuation. They left with promises to call. The door clicked shut and I sank into a chair, heart thudding, that old ache stretching awake like a cat. If you've ever had family show up with a ledger where love should be, I see you. And because I tell stories the way I solve problems, out loud, tell me yours below. I read everyone. I used to think leaving Pennsylvania would erase the slush of those winters, but it turns out memory travels light. After Mom left, Dad kept the wheels turning at Ellis Auto, a 3-bay garage, and a dented soda machine that ate quarters like popcorn. He smelled like oil and wintergreen gum and persevered. He'd come home sore and still ask about my day. He refused to let the world teach me how small we were. By 13, I couldn't stand the way his shoulders sloped over the kitchen table, the stack of envelopes leaning like a tower after a small earthquake. I babysat. I delivered circulars at dawn with a headlamp. I wiped down booths at a diner that still had a smoking section. The money went into a jar on top of the fridge, and then the jar went to rent. And then we tried again. I hid my own tired underjokes under equations. Math club became therapy. Patterns behaving, answers that arrived if you wrestled long enough. In high school, I aimed at the only exit I trusted, a scholarship. I applied until my wrists hurt and my guidance counselor threatened to stage an intervention about sleep. At 17, a state university put a letter in my hand that smelled like ink and rescue. Tuition covered in full for a statistics major with a data science emphasis. Books and housing were on me. I made it work. I stacked jobs like bricks, campus diner mornings, office assistant afternoons, cleaning offices at night until my shoulders roared. I kept my grades sharp enough to cut with. A fintech internship in Dallas taught me 2 things. Numbers are arguments you can win with receipts, and people will underestimate you if you smile while handing them those receipts. By graduation, I had a degree, a portfolio of projects, and an offer in Austin. I took a bus south with 2 suitcases and a plant that did not survive I-35. The city opened its arms. I started as a junior analyst, sniffing out suspicious patterns, and ended up designing systems that can smell a bad transaction 2 hops away. Paychecks got bigger, so did expectations. And every month, I sent Dad money. It began as $200 for the light bill. It turned into $600 toward the new roof, $1,000 when the transmission sighed its last. He told me to keep my money. I told him it wasn't his. I bought him a coffee maker with a timer. He called just to say, "It was hot when I woke up. Look at that." Renee's postcards, if you could call them that, arrived once a year like clockwork. Happy birthday. Hope, you're well. No return address. I kept them in a drawer I never opened. I told myself indifference was the same thing as healing. Then she found me. The day after their visit, I met Renee and Landon at a cafe that sold pastries with names I couldn't pronounce and cappuccinos that came with hearts in the foam. They were in the corner, my mother with a practiced smile, my half-brother slumped like gravity worked differently for him. "Mara," Renee said, reaching for my hand. I kept both of mine around my cup. She launched into a story about the last 20 years, each sentence an attempt to sandpaper history. "Your father made it impossible to stay in touch," she said, eyebrows lifting into a plea. "He cut me out. He poisoned you against me." I let her talk. Dad had left our phone plugged into the wall in case she called, even after the service got cut for a week and he had to pay a reconnection fee. He had introduced me to my first debit card like a magic trick. He had not done what she was saying. "Landon's future is at stake," she pivoted. "We just need a little help to get him started. He's so smart. He deserves a chance." "Also, my car's garbage," Landon added, finally glancing up. "If I'm commuting off campus next semester, I'll need something that won't die on Mopac. Maybe a charger or a Tesla 3. Nothing crazy." He held up his phone. "And I need a new one. This is last year's." I set my cup down. "You're asking for nearly 60 grand in tuition plus a car and a phone." "You're loaded," Landon said. "Why act broke?" Renee's face did something brittle. "We are family," she said, putting weight on the word, the way someone puts weight on a door to test the hinges. "You have so much. Share." "I worked for what I have," I said, voice steady because I made it be. "When you left, there wasn't enough heat in the house, and Dad still made sure I had a winter coat. He didn't keep you from me. You kept yourself from us." Her smile snapped. The kindness fell away like a costume. "Ungrateful," she said crisply. "I gave you life. You claw your way into some money and suddenly you're too good for your own mother?" Landon leaned back, smirk tightening. "Told you she'd be like this," he said to her, the words landing between us like ice cubes. The cafe went quiet around our argument, all espresso hiss and side-eye. My chair scraped the floor when I stood. "We're done," I said. "I don't owe you." Renee's hand clamped onto my wrist. "You'll regret it," she hissed. I peeled her fingers off like they were something sticky I'd stepped in, tossed a 5 on the table for a tip, and walked into the blare of sun. They weren't finished. That afternoon, my building buzzer sounded again, against my better judgment, and because a scene in the hallway helps no one, I let them up. "Just to talk," Renee said, voice sugared, and Landon drifted past her toward my desk like a tide. Within a minute, he'd opened my laptop, and my bank's login page blinked back at me. I crossed the room faster than thought. "What are you doing?" I snapped. He shrugged. "Curious." No apology, no shame. Renee didn't even flinch. "We need to understand what you can spare," she said, as if this were a budget meeting and I was their accountant. I pulled the laptop back, hands trembling. My email tab was open. On top sat a message that made the world tilt. A forward from my father's account, an old thread where I'd sent him my new job title and, because he'd asked, the offer letter with my salary. Forwarded to Renee's address. My stomach dropped like an elevator. "You got into Dad's email," I said. I could hear my own heartbeat. "You went through his account to see what I make." Her mouth thinned, then twisted. "Your father has always been careless," she said. "He trapped me in that life. He dragged you down." Landon snorted. "Guy's a loser," he said flatly. "You're better than him. Act like it." Something hot and clean moved through me. I picked up my phone and started dialing. "Leave," I said, "or the police come meet you." Renee's eyes flickered. You'd call the cops on your mother? You hacked my father. You tried to access my accounts, I said, finger hovering over the green button. Walk out. She grabbed Landon's sleeve. You're making a mistake, she said back to Ice. We're not done. The door shut behind them and left a quiet that rang. I sat down and did the thing that has always steadied me. I gathered evidence. I took screenshots, failed login attempts, two-factor alerts, timestamps that lined up with their visit. I changed every password. I turned off Face ID. I shut down my laptop and then turned it back on, like I could reboot the part of me that believed there was a version of my mother who wanted me without wanting what I could do. Then I called Dad. He answered on the second ring, the sound of baseball on the TV low in the background. Hey, kiddo, he said, warm through the static. I told him everything, the knock, the ask, the cafe, the laptop, the forwarded email. He was quiet for a long inhale. That's Renee, he said finally, and the sadness in his voice made me want to put my hand through a wall. She could make a lie sound like a prayer. I'm sorry. She changed your password, I said, weeks ago. Figures, he murmured. I'll go down to the shop tomorrow and have Tony help me fix it. Don't you lose sleep. I didn't sleep much anyway, but I made a plan. The next morning, I sat in a spare, serious office across from a woman whose presence lowered my blood pressure by 20 points just by existing. Alicia Gomez, my attorney. I slid a stack of printed screenshots across her desk, paper-clipped and annotated because I am who I am. This is not just a boundary violation, she said after 5 minutes of reading. This is unlawful access and attempted fraud. We'll file for a protective order and include every detail. The courthouse smelled like dust and fluorescent lights. The clerk had a tired smile that said she had seen everything twice. We filed the paperwork and a week later sat before a judge who asked 3 questions that were simple and searing. I answered each with a fact. The temporary order was granted. Renee and Landon were barred from contacting me or coming within 1,000 feet of my home or office. I walked out into the Texas heat feeling like I'd been carrying a concrete block and someone had finally helped me set it down. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a fraud alert. A $10,000 transfer attempt out of my savings, flagged and stopped by 2-factor authentication. The app asked if the transfer was me. I hit no, and my chest went tight and light at once. I sent the notice to Alicia. She filed a violation with the court. Consequences are not revenge. They are math. At work, I channeled the wildfire into something I could steer. We were rolling out an anomaly detection model for instant payments, the kind that live and die by milliseconds. I fought for more time on labels and refused to ship until the false positives wouldn't drown our team. After the meeting, my boss, Priya, tapped the conference table. You good? She asked, eyebrows aiming past my professionalism. I'm adjusting you, I said. Adjust with backup, she replied, and take Friday. Your brain deserves a nap. I didn't nap. I flew to Erie. Pennsylvania in late fall is all copper and smoke. Ellis Auto still had the hand-painted sign Dad made when he was 26, the EA little wider than the other letters. The waiting room smelled like coffee and rubber. A stack of magazines tilted toward collapse. Dad's face lit like a porch light when I walked in. There's my kid, he said, pulling me into a hug that organized my insides. We spent the afternoon changing the shop's Wi-Fi password, updating his email recovery phone number, and drafting a letter to customers about holiday hours. He insisted on feeding me a turkey sandwich as big as my head. On Saturday, we took inventory. On Sunday, he fell asleep during a football game, with his chin on his chest and his hand still halfway to the bowl of peanuts. I covered him with a blanket and stood in the doorway watching the man who chose me every day he could. I used to think I owed him a debt I could never repay. Now I think love is the kind of math that doesn't keep a ledger. Monday morning, I flew back to Austin for the next step, the hearing to make the protective order permanent. Alicia prepped me like she was lacing me into armor made of facts. Answer only what is asked, she said. Do not offer them your dignity to borrow. I nodded, until I meant it. That night, a text pinged my phone from an unknown number. It was 3 sentences, all knives. You think a piece of paper protects you? You think people don't see through you? Family owes family. I forwarded it to Alicia and then powered my phone off. I let the darkness inside the apartment be simply dark. Before I slept, I opened a blank document and typed a question I ask my team when a problem is sticky and personal. What outcome are we solving for? Beneath it, I wrote the answer I couldn't unknow now that I'd said it to myself. Safety, sanity, a life where I am not collateral. I closed the laptop and finally slept. Courtrooms have their own weather. Ours was over-air-conditioned and bright, with a judge whose gaze could pin a hummingbird to a wall. Renee wore pearl earrings and a dress that tried to plead for her. Landon wore a hoodie and boredom like armor. Alicia asked me to tell the story in order. I did. The knock, the ask, the cafe, the laptop, the forwarded email, the failed transfer, the texts. She submitted my screenshots, the phone records, the bank alert. She pointed to the temporary order they had already strained against. Renee's attorney tried to make it a family misunderstanding. A miscommunication about support, he said smoothly, as if a hacked email account were an RSVP that got lost in the mail. He asked whether I'd ever helped my father financially. Yes, I said, willingly. He asked whether I'd ever helped my mother. She never asked for help without a price tag, I replied, keeping my eyes on the judge's face, not on Renee's flinch. Landon spoke when he was called, which did not go as his attorney hoped. It's not like we tried to steal, he said, voice flat. We just wanted to see the numbers. Alicia didn't have to say anything. The judge's eyebrows did it for her. The order became permanent with teeth, no contact, no proximity, no accidental drive-bys. The judge added a requirement for Renee to attend a digital privacy class and assessed court costs against them. Family does not confer immunity, she said, gavel landing like a period at the end of a sentence I had been writing for years. When I walked out into the high, noon glare, Alicia squeezed my shoulder. You did precisely enough, she said. No more, no less. I sat in my car and let myself cry for 10 minutes, skull-cracking, undignified, necessary. Then I went home, poured water over coffee grounds, and turned on the radio to a station that played Old Soul. I texted Dad a selfie with both thumbs up. He replied with a blurry picture of the shop cat and the caption, "Your lawyer could outrun a tornado." The thing about installing boundaries is that every part of your life gets the update. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, set up account alerts that would ping me if anyone so much as breathed near a loan application with my name on it, and led a lunch and learn at work on personal digital security. 27 engineers showed up with notebooks like I was about to tell them a secret. I did. Halfway through, my teammate Kenji raised a hand. This is great for protecting ourselves, he said. What about the people who never get taught this stuff? I looked at the slide deck on the screen, password managers, recovery codes, the boring little tricks that keep wolves outside the door, and felt the nudge I'd been ignoring turn into a shove. I called Bree, a social worker friend who specializes in keeping teenagers alive and aiming forward. I want to build a thing, I said. Small, fast, useful. The best kind, she replied. Name it. We called it the First Light Fund because that's what morning felt like after a year of alarms. A little less dangerous. We started with grocery cards and bus passes, then book stipends, then a monthly workshop at the rec center on the east side, where we bribed attendants with pizza and taught spreadsheet basics, budgeting, and the unglamorous hacks of financial hygiene. Kenji built a clean little website on a Saturday. My neighbor Luis printed flyers and taped them up. I put in seed money and matched donations quietly because I didn't want applause. I wanted a pile of receipts that turned into practical oxygen. The first night, 6 kids came, eyes skeptical. The second, 12. By the fourth, the room was full and we had to steal folding chairs from the Zumba class. A girl named Noor, 17 and unimpressed with grown-ups, learned VLOOKUP and texted me a screenshot of her math grade a week later. A minus. I printed it out and stuck it on my fridge with a magnet shaped like a slice of pizza. On Wednesdays after the workshop, I'd drive home with the windows down, Austin breathing warm and noisy, and think, this is what money is for. Not to buy truce with people who use you. To set tables where someone like me at 13 doesn't have to eat panic for dinner? The protective order held like a fence that didn't squeak, but the human impulse to press against the slats is strong. Renee tried a sideways approach. A Facebook message to my father asking him to talk some sense into me. He forwarded it to Alicia, then called me to make sure I ate enough protein. I put extra turkey on my sandwich, he said. Doctor says it's good for my joints. Aunt Jo began to send stories like small lanterns. She borrowed my wedding china, Aunt Jo told me over the phone, then said she'd never seen it when I asked for it back. She always needed and never owed. Baby, it wasn't you. The word baby, delivered from a woman who had survived Renee before me, loosened a knot behind my ribs I didn't know I'd tied. Landon posted about haters and fake family on social media I didn't follow. Friends sent screenshots anyway, I told them not to. Not every mirror deserves your face in it. I went to therapy and learned there's a room in me that thinks safety is something I earn by shrinking. We moved some furniture around. Dr. Patel gave me language I could put between myself and the parts of the world that confuse hunger with entitlement. You are allowed to require integrity before you invest, she said. We practiced saying no without the word sorry decorating it like sprinkles. Mid-January, Dad slipped on ice behind the shop and sprained his wrist. He called me from urgent care, high on ibuprofen and gratitude for the nurse who had warmed his x-ray room. I flew out that night with a suitcase full of sweaters and a quiet panic that vibrated my teeth. He was fine, embarrassed and temporarily banned by Tony from hoisting anything heavier than a lug wrench. I stayed a week anyway. We set up an online booking system so customers could schedule oil changes without playing phone tag. We ordered benches for the waiting room that didn't wobble. I convinced him to take Tuesdays off and let Tony run the show. On that Tuesday, we drove to Presque Isle and ate donuts in the car while the lake tried to gnaw its way onto shore. "Proud of you," he said, as if telling me the sky existed. "Proud of me for raising you," he added, and we both laughed at the corniness until it wasn't funny anymore. And just true. Before I flew home, I tucked a folder in the shop safe, copies of his will, beneficiary designations, a list of passwords written in his tidy printing. "Morbid," he said, but he kissed my forehead after he said it. February brought something I didn't expect, an invitation to speak at the public library for their Money and Life series. I said yes, then immediately thought of every way it could become a story I didn't want to live. The night of, the room was half full of teenagers who looked tired, and half full of adults who looked more tired. I talked about saving $3 without being ashamed of it. I talked about the first time I understood an amortization schedule, and the first time I understood a boundary. I didn't say Renee's name. I said, some people will love you best when you are useful to them. You do not have to stay useful to keep being lovable. After, a man in a green work shirt hung back while I packed up my laptop. He looked like every customer at Ellis Auto who tried to pay Dad in cash because card fees are mean. "My kid likes numbers," he said. "Doesn't like school. Your thing on Wednesdays, can he come?" I wrote Noor's name and my phone number on a sticky note and said, "Tell him there's pizza." That weekend, I closed on a house. Nothing grand, just a 1950s bungalow with a pale yellow door and a big pecan tree that scribbles shade across the lawn. Me, the bank, and a stack of signatures. I cried on the floor between the still-rolled rugs because nobody can ever again tell me I don't belong in my own life. Luis and Kenji helped me move. Bree brought plants that are allegedly unkillable. Priya appeared with a toolbox and a lecture about surge protectors. We christened the place with queso and the worst playlist you've ever heard. 2 days later, a postcard slid through the mail slot with 4 words pressed into the paper like a thumbprint. "Hope you're happy now." There was no return address. The old me would have kept it in the drawer with the others, a museum of my own hurt. The new me put it in the recycling bin, then took the bag out to the curb so I wouldn't go fishing it back. Spring sharpened into summer. The First Light Fund picked up a small grant, and we used it to add a laptop lending closet for students whose only device was a cracked phone. Noor taught the newer kids how to build a budget that didn't make them feel scolded. I watched her invent metaphors on the fly. "It's like your paycheck is a pizza," she said. "Rent is 2 slices. Don't act surprised when it's gone if you started by eating half." I got promoted. The email subject line said simply, "New scope." I sat very still at my desk for a minute, then texted Dad, who replied with 12 exclamation points and a photo of himself holding a celebratory donut like a trophy. On a humid night in June, Alicia called. "Their counsel filed a motion to modify the order," she said, and I felt the brief, irrational urge to crawl under my couch. "Don't worry," she added. "We'll be there." We went. Renee's attorney argued that the order was overbroad and prevented natural reconciliation. Alicia raised an eyebrow and submitted a binder so thick it sighed when the judge picked it up. The attempted transfer, the texts, the proximity pings from the day they showed up in my building lobby and Darius had to turn them away. The Facebook messages to my father. The judge didn't raise her voice. "This court does not function as an apology factory," she said. "It functions as a boundary where one was not respected. Motion denied." Renee looked at me then, really looked, as if measuring a distance she couldn't fudge. I looked back and felt, not triumph, not even relief, Just the clean quiet of daylight in a room you finally aired out. In August, Landon sent a letter through Alicia. Not to me, by design. A page of apologies that sounded like lines he'd been handed and some that didn't. Embedded among the words was the only sentence that mattered. I'm in over my head. He asked if I could co-sign a private loan just to get back on track. I asked Alicia to send him a list instead. Community resources, scholarship navigators, a clinic that helps with job placement, the number for an addictions counselor in case the twitch I saw in his hands wasn't just bravado. I did not say yes. I did not say never. I said, here is where help lives that doesn't have my name on it. He didn't write back. Sometimes the only proof you get that you chose well is the absence of the bad thing that would have followed the other choice. In September, Aunt Jo came to Austin with a suitcase that had seen better days and a lemon bar recipe that had not. We sat on my porch swing, and she told me about being 19 and buying Renee a prom dress on a credit card because their mother wouldn't. About how the next month Renee bought shoes for herself and forgot the bill existed. She always had a reason, Aunt Jo said, and she always had a story about the reason. You don't owe any more stories. We took her to the Wednesday workshop. She cried silently while Noor taught a table of boys how to split utilities 3 ways without wanting to fight. Look at you, she whispered, and I pretended not to hear the pride cracking her voice. By winter, the bungalow felt like a living thing that exhaled when I came home. I learned the sound of the rain on its roof, the complaint of its pipes, the exact sequence of light switches to keep the kitchen from feeling like an interrogation room. I got a dog named Pico because he was a rescue and because he wiggles like a metronome set to joy. He sleeps on the couch like an unpaid intern and wakes me at 6 as if he's my tiny boss. It's good for me, the reliable demand of another heartbeat. The first light fund moved to a bigger room, and we added a bring a grown-up night for parents who had questions they were ashamed to ask. A woman in scrubs raised her hand and said, "What's a Roth again?" I drew it on the whiteboard like a cartoon sun and watched relief unclench her shoulders. We are never too late for the basics. We are frequently ignored when we ask. I want fewer closed doors and more messy rooms where people are allowed to learn out loud. Renee stayed a roomer. Landon became a silence. Dad's wrist healed. He bought himself boots with good tread and sent me a picture of them like a kid showing off new sneakers on the first day of school. I'm not falling again, he said. Not if I can help it. The shop had its best year in a decade, and he finally let Tony talk him into closing on Sundays. God rested, Tony said. So can you. On their first Sunday off, they went fishing and caught absolutely nothing. Peaceful, Dad reported, like that was the whole point. The invitation to speak at the library turned into a list. Community colleges, a Rotary breakfast, a high school gym that smelled like rubber and old dreams. I said yes to most of them. After one talk, a kid with a backpack too big for his shoulders came up to me and said, I didn't know saying no could sound like that. I told him the trick. Ask yourself if future you will feel safer because present you disappointed someone. If the answer is yes, it's not unkindness, it's stewardship. On the anniversary of the day, Renee knocked on my door. I made a pot of chili big enough to feed a baseball team and invited the people who had become my coordinates. Bree brought cornbread. Kenji arrived with a stack of board games and declared himself scorekeeper. Louis carried in a cooler with a wink like there was state business inside. Priya showed up late because she'd stopped on the way to buy string lights and then insisted we hang them immediately in the backyard pecan tree. We ate and argued about the best breakfast tacos in Travis County with the warmth of people who know where the spoons live in your kitchen. Around 9, the doorbell rang. Everyone went quiet in a way that proved we all have the same nervous system. I checked the peephole. A delivery driver stood there with a box. For First Light, he said, handing me a package with no sender listed. Inside was a stack of spiral notebooks, 100 gel pens, and a single index card that said, For the Pizza Kids. No name, no return address. I wanted so badly to assign it to someone redemptive. I didn't. Some gifts are not a puzzle. They are a yes. We ate dessert on paper plates in the backyard, and Pico tried to convince us he had never once in his life been fed. Above us, the string lights glowed like a row of patient moons. I thought then, and I think now, that happiness is not proof you won. It's proof you're no longer fighting the wrong battle. Last week, I got a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. The transcription read, This is Officer Halverson with the County Sheriff's Office calling to confirm an address for service. My stomach sank and steadied at once. I called Alicia. Likely serving them with a fine for the last violation, she said. We knew it was coming. Paperwork walks slower than anger. I took Pico for a long walk along the river and watched the bats pour out from under the bridge like someone had shaken the sky free of pepper. When I got home, there was a letter in my mailbox from Aunt Jo, a recipe card in her neat looping hand, and a note. She wrote, "Proud of the woman you became without the apology you deserved. See you at Christmas if the roads don't ice." I taped the recipe card to the inside of the cabinet door with the spices. Then I put the kettle on and stood in the kitchen I own, in the life I claimed without permission slips, and realized the old drawer, the one with the postcards, was gone. Not because I cleaned it out, but because I'd stopped needing a museum. If you've lived a version of this, if a knock at your door tried to make you smaller than you fought to be, know this. You don't have to fund your own erasure. You can love people without underwriting their worst habits. You are allowed to require integrity before you invest. You are allowed to end a scene mid-story and write a different one. I used to think family was the rope that tied you to a dock no matter how strange the weather got. Now I think family is who throws you a line when you're swallowing waves and lets you do the same for them. For me, that's Dad, who still texts me. Pictures of his breakfast like it belongs in a museum. Bree and Kenji and Luis and Priya, who show up with socket wrenches and soup. The kids at the rec center who laugh at my spreadsheets and then ask for copies. Aunt Jo, who chose truth over comfort. And the woman in my mirror who learned to set terms and keep them. Thanks for listening. Tell me what family means to you. What you decided it would be when you realized you could decide. And if you're somewhere between the knock and the plan, hear me. Your worth isn't a number anyone can type into a transfer field. It's the life you build and the people you let belong inside it. Winter came in sideways, rain that wanted to be ice, wind that shook the pecan tree like it had a grudge. Pico took one look outside and argued his case for indoor life with the eloquence of a small, determined diplomat. I laced on boots anyway and walked the block, the kind of stubborn loop that makes your neighbors think you're training for something bigger than calm. The protective order faded from daily thought to infrastructure, like plumbing, noticed only when it fails. It didn't fail. My phone stopped being a tripwire. The mailbox went back to holding coupons and the occasional letter from Aunt Jo, who writes like she's being paid per curl of ink. Work found a new gear. The anomaly detection project now ran in production, and the nightly dashboards were a choir that mostly sang on key. I built a team charter that said out loud the things tech likes to pretend just happen. No heroics at midnight, no martyrs, no move fast and break people. Priya taped it to the wall with blue painter's tape and said, "Frame it, Ellis." A week before Christmas, two things happened on the same day. First, a card arrived from Dad with a photo of the shop cat wearing a Santa hat at a tilt that suggested bribery. Inside, he wrote, "Closed on Sundays now. Tony says we're civilized. Proud of us. Proud of you." The second was a call from Alicia, a brief hearing to enforce unpaid court costs. "Routine," she said. "No audience participation necessary." I let the call end and allowed myself one small, mean thought. Accountability doesn't need my applause. I did Erie for Christmas. Dad and I rolled out sugar cookies at the kitchen table like we were laying shingles, and Aunt Jo showed up with lemon bars that could make a bishop swear. We ate and played cards and fell asleep to the throb of football. It was ordinary in the way a healed bone can be ordinary, until you notice the weather changing and feel the ghost ache and then smile because it doesn't own you anymore. While I was home, Dad said the sentence I both dreaded and wanted. "Kid, I'm thinking about selling the shop next year." He said it like a man declaring a ceasefire with time. "Tony wants it," he added. "Says he'll keep the sign." The sign, the hand-painted E wider than the other letters. I nodded and swallowed around. The lump in my throat. "We'll do it right," I told him. "No handshake promises, paper terms, protection." I called Alicia from the back office while Dad sorted lug nuts into coffee cans like they were coins. She recommended a small business attorney she liked. We set a meeting for January. Before I flew back to Austin, Dad tucked a box into my suitcase. "What's this?" I asked. "Loose photos and the Polaroid of you and your science fair bridge," he said. "Take 'em. I've been meaning to." I opened the box at my kitchen table 3 days later and found a childhood in glossy rectangles. Me in an oversized hoodie holding a cat that clearly wanted freedom. Dad asleep in a folding chair at a picnic, mouth open to the sky. The pawn shop parking lot where he'd taught me the arithmetic of survival. I slid the bridge photo onto the fridge next to Noor's math grade. It felt like a timeline finally agreeing with itself. January was paperwork. Tony came to Austin once for a long weekend to click through a workbook I built. P&L in plain English, inventory valuation, vendor contracts, a schedule for the ancient but reliable tire balancer to be serviced twice a year. We met with the attorney, hammered out a seller financing arrangement that didn't gamble Dad's retirement on Tony's good intentions, and created a contingency plan for the day when even Tuesdays off weren't enough. Dad pretended not to enjoy being thoroughly cared for. I didn't pretend. On the day they signed, we put the phone on speaker. "Feels weird," Dad said, and I could hear the wrench in his voice. "Feels like putting your kid on the bus the first day of school." "Then wave," I said, "and trust you did the lunches right." Tony whooped in the background and promised to fix the flicker in the waiting room light. Tomorrow, for real. I told him I had it on record. That night, I took Pico for a long walk past houses that had been decorated for a month and somehow still glowed like new ideas. When we got home, I stood under the shower until my skin set enough and realized the tightness between my shoulder blades had been a map of worry I didn't know I was carrying. Selling the shop wasn't a surrender, it was the math of rest. In therapy, Dr. Patel called it non-catastrophic change. I called it a new kind of breath. On the first light side, we grew in the slow, stubborn way that feels like muscle. The grant we'd landed last spring turned into a partnership with the library, which gave us a bigger room and a closet for laptops that Noor treated like a dragon guards its hoard. We launched a bring a grown-up night because we kept watching teenagers go home to parents who had questions they were too embarrassed to ask. A nurse in scrubs raised her hand and said, "Can you explain credit again like I'm tired?" And I drew a picture on the board that looked like a roller coaster and made half the room laugh. We passed out pizza. We hugged nobody and almost everyone, if you know what I mean. Kenji suggested a soft expansion, a pilot program for small emergency grants with a maximum amount and very boring rules. "Boring keeps us alive," he said, and as the resident lover of guardrails, I agreed. We wrote a policy that said yes with limits, yes with receipts, yes with eyes open. We said no when we had to. We got good at both. Some nights, after everyone left, I'd sit in the empty room with Bree and listen to the building tick as it cooled, the city outside acting like cities do. Bree would kick off her shoes and say, "You ever think about how many of us got good at surviving because we were drafted at 9? I'd nod. Then we'd argue about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, the kind of argument that proves you feel safe. In March, Renee found a new angle, the kind that tries to smuggle itself in as reconciliation. She mailed Aunt Jo a box of old family photographs and a note that said, in her looping script, "Thought Mara might want these." Aunt Jo called me first. "I'll bring them when I visit," she said. "If you want them. If not, I'll keep them at my place." "Thanks," I said, recognizing a trap de-weaponized. When she came down 2 weeks later, we opened the box on my dining table. Nestled among pictures of my grandparents as teenagers and a vacation we took to the lake the summer before everything exploded were 3 prints of a little boy with Renee's mouth and eyes like chipped granite, Landon in a bathtub, Landon in a high chair, Landon asleep in a heap of sunlight on a carpet. "I don't hate him," I said out loud to the pictures and to myself. "I hate the story he learned." I didn't put them on the fridge. I didn't throw them out. I slid them back into the box and labeled it in Sharpie. Family, Part A. A future I couldn't yet name would decide where they went. That same week, Alicia forwarded a curt notice. The court had assessed a small penalty for a late payment on costs. Nothing dramatic, no fireworks. Just the click of the right gear against the right tooth. I filed the email into the folder named for a serenity I was still learning on purpose. April became a season of small miracles. Dad sent a selfie in a ridiculous sun hat from a farmer's market. He'd gone on a date with a woman named Carol who sells bread shaped like braids and opinions like they were samples. "She knows the Bengals," he said, awestruck. "She talks like she understands clock management." I texted back with sincerity. "Marry her immediately." He texted a photo of a cinnamon roll the size of a cereal bowl instead. "Let's not get crazy," he wrote. I got promoted again. Not up a ladder so much as into a room where the lights are brighter. The title didn't matter as much as the new kind of work. Budget conversations where I did not apologize for wanting accuracy. Headcount plans where I wrote the names of people I'd bet on and refused to trade them away for shiny mediocrity. I hired an intern class that included a single mom who had taught herself SQL in night school and an army vet who talked about latency like it had personally insulted him. I watched them break problems into chunks and felt a kind of pride that didn't ask me to shrink. The house got a new roof, which is not romantic until you consider what romance really is, choosing to shelter something and then doing it. I paid a crew that showed up on time, replaced plywood, and left the yard cleaner than they found it. At dusk, the foreman knocked and said, "You're good for 20 years, and I cried in the stairwell holding a bill because sometimes the end of a strain you didn't name feels like the beginning of a song. May tried to unspool me with a text from an unknown number. Hey, it was Landon. It shouldn't have gotten through. The order covered direct contact. But he had used a service that slaps a temporary number on a message like a mask. He wrote 3 sentences and then 5 more. No threats, no ask, just a muddle of apology and a line that snagged me. I don't know how to stop being the person Mom raised me to be. I forwarded the text to Alicia, blocked the number, and went for a walk with Pico until my legs were more tired than my brain. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter I would not send. Landon. Stopping is a series of habits in the opposite direction of what you were taught. It isn't a single choice, it's 10,000. Do them far away from me. I folded the paper in half and slid it into the drawer with the spare batteries, which is where I keep things I might need someday, but not now. That same week, the First Light Fund held its first budget night for parents only. A man in steel-toe boots said, "No one ever said the quiet parts out loud like this." A woman in a floral blouse asked if there's a bank account that doesn't punish small balances. We made a list of local credit unions, passed around cookies, and watched a circle of strangers turn into something like a net. The lights hummed, the pizza boxes collapsed into thirds. Noor collected laptops with the efficiency of a bouncer, and I went home feeling like the world had shifted a millimeter toward sense. June brought heat that didn't knock, just walked in and took off its shoes. On a Saturday so bright my phone washed out every photo, Aunt Jo and I hung the old Ellis auto sign in my garage. Tony had insisted we take it. He'd commissioned a new one that matched the shop's current life. But I wanted the stubborn E where I could see it. We used a stud finder and an optimistic prayer. When it held, Aunt Jo whooped and said, "Look at you, putting your name on the wall of your life." We ordered enchiladas from the place on the corner and ate them out of foil on the driveway. Pico begged with the intensity of a televangelist. Across the street, my neighbor waved from her porch and shouted, "Love the sign!" I shouted thanks and meant it like a benediction. Later, after dishes, after Aunt Jo fell asleep during a crime show, with the volume far too high, I stood in the garage and stared at the crooked letter until I could finally admit I loved it because it was wrong, because it was a record of a man who didn't have money for a new board when he mismeasured and decided to love his error into iconic. July delivered a storm that knocked out power on the east side for a day and a half of the internet's patience for a week. The library texted to say they were open if we needed AC. We hauled our workshop there by hand. Laptops in crates, extension cords like linguine, power strips labeled with masking tape. The kids showed up sweaty and grateful. Noor fanned herself with a flyer and taught a crash course titled How to Budget When the Universe is Petty. The title alone should have funded a grant. In the low-lit hum of the library's multi-purpose room, a memory lit up like a flare. The year Dad and I spent 3 August days in the mall, just for the air conditioning, walking circles, counting wishes in the fountain, as if they were cents that could add up, sharing a pretzel we'd pretended we didn't want. In the middle of the lesson, I excused myself to the hallway and cried for the version of us that kept inventing ways to survive. Then I washed my face, went back in, and taught the difference between APR and APY like I was reading a spell book to people I loved. In August, I tried introducing a new word to my own vocabulary: vacation. I rented a cabin in the hill country with a deck that leaned toward a creek and a rule about my laptop. It stayed shut. I brought Pico and 3 paperbacks and the stubborn belief that rest is a skill. On day 3, my hands stopped twitching like they were looking for a task. On day 4, I wrote a list titled Things I'm Not Fixing. It had 2 columns, not mine and not now. Renee's name wasn't on either because she doesn't get a column anymore. A thunderstorm rolled through on the last night, a slow drummer on the roof, and I slept 9 hours. In the morning, I drove back to Austin, feeling like my body fit my life again. Back at work, I found a postcard on my desk from Priya, a drawing of a hammock strung between 2 imaginary trees. On the back, she'd written, "The point of a hammock is that it holds you even when you do nothing." I taped it above my monitor, like a practical dare. September was a tangle of good and hard. The shop sale closed its first 6 months exactly on plan. Tony texted Dad photos of himself installing the waiting room light and then photos of Dad's reply. 3 thumbs up emojis and a crooked selfie. Dad sent me a picture of Carol's bread with a caption that said, "Is it weird I'm emotionally attached to this?" I replied, "No. Eat your feelings." Butter helps. Then a letter arrived from Alicia. A courtesy heads up. Renee had petitioned to expunge some records related to the protective order from public search, a legal maneuver that has its place. "Common for folks looking for jobs," Alicia said. "It won't touch the order itself." I nodded at the phone like she could see me. It wouldn't change anything concrete in my life. It still rattled the part of me that believes consequences should announce themselves forever. I took the feeling to therapy and laid it on the table like a map. Dr. Patel touched the key in the corner, the place where feelings explain themselves, and said, "You can want fairness without needing it to be a tattoo." We talked about forgiveness, which is easy to script and hard to stage. I said I did not need to meet Renee at the well, that I would be fine if we simply never shared a zip code again. "That's forgiveness enough," Dr. Patel said, "letting go of the debt ledger when the debtor keeps printing new invoices." On a Saturday afternoon, when the sky was too blue to take seriously, I hosted a cookout in the backyard and called it Found Family Day. Bree brought a folding table that had seen better potlucks. Kenji became a tyrant about onion placement. Luis installed a shade sail like he had 6 extra arms. Priya made a salad and then announced we were all required to eat some. Noor showed up with 2 friends and the energy of a small weather system. We ate and yelled over each other, and someone burped in a way that should have been illegal. And for an hour, I forgot the geometry of every room I'd ever scanned for exits. Around dusk, Aunt Jo told a story about Renee when they were kids that made everyone at the picnic table go quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask to be filled. When she finished, she looked at me and shrugged. "Sometimes the only apology you get is that someone else sees it too," she said. We toasted to that with sparkling water because half of us had to drive and the other half were lightweights. October marked 2 years since the knock. I bought a small cake on purpose, the kind of sugar ritual I used to resent and now reclaimed. I took a slice to the rec center and left the rest for the staff. After the workshop, a kid named Mateo asked if he could DM me questions about college applications. "Yes, for the next 2 months," I said, because boundaries can also be kindness. He nodded like I'd taught him a secret handshake and promised not to send paragraphs at 2 a.m. He kept his word. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop closed and wrote the version of gratitude that doesn't come with a catch. For a father who learned the internet because I asked. For a dog who assumes good news. For a small, tired room at the library that smells like pencil shavings and new chances. For a lawyer who speaks like a cliff. You stop where she says. For a therapist who doesn't flinch when I try to charm my way out of doing the work. For a city that hums like a machine tuned for hope. For a mailbox mostly about coupons. On a whim, I pulled out the old postcards from Renee, the ones I hadn't recycled because once upon a time I believed that keeping proof equaled keeping safe. I read 2, and the only thing I felt was the paper's cheapness. I slid them back into the drawer, not out of nostalgia, but because I didn't need a ceremony to say I had moved on. In November, I got a call from a number with an eerie area code. It was Tony. "Don't panic, yours," he said, which is of course how panic introduces itself. "We're fine. Little incident. Your mom came by the shop." My heartbeat did a thing I wish it didn't remember how to do. "And?" "She asked for Dan," he said carefully. "We told her he wasn't here. She said she wanted to see the place one last time. I told her it wasn't hers to tour. She left." "She didn't." I trailed off. "Nothing stupid," Tony assured me. "I thought you should know." "Thank you," I said, and meant for being a wall without being a war. I texted Alicia the single-sentence version. She responded with a thumbs up and then, "You're okay." Sometimes the smallest assurance is the most precise medicine. I took Pico to the dog park and watched him negotiate his rank among 8 strangers with nothing but tail language and optimism. I tried to remember how that felt. Thanksgiving, I hosted in Austin. Dad and Carol flew down with a carry-on that contained an entire bakery. Bree brought her partner, Priya brought her stubborn salad, Kenji brought a board game that required a whiteboard and diplomatic immunity. We went around the table and said true things. Dad said he was grateful for online booking. No offense to the phone, but... And Carol said she was grateful for men who can admit they like cardigans. I said I was grateful for a past that taught me strategy and a present that allowed me not to use it all the time. After everyone left, the house was a wreck. Plates stacked like a city skyline, counters sugared, the dog asleep on his side like a chalk outline. I stood in the doorway and loved the mess so much my hands shook. 2 years earlier, the same mess would have felt like a test I might fail. Growth is a larger sink and a smaller panic. December again. The air did its crisp magic trick. The pecan tree let go of itself by degrees. The first light fund hit our modest end-of-year goal and a little beyond. Noor applied to 3 colleges and asked me to read her essays. In one, she wrote about the power of turning "I'm fine" into "I could use help," and I had to walk away from my desk and pet the dog for 5 minutes before I could write comments that didn't look like tears. A week before Christmas, a plain envelope arrived with no return address and the handwriting of a person determined to be neutral. Inside was a single sheet. I recognized Renee's voice, the sentence rhythm like a fingerprint, flattened into something that wanted to be sincere. It read, "I am not asking for money. I am not asking for contact. I am sorry for the things that can't be fixed. I hope you are well." I set the paper down and waited for the old alarms. They didn't sound. I folded the letter and put it in the box with family Part A. I wrote on the outside, in smaller letters, Part B, "I did not forgive. I did not forgive." I named it what it was, a sentence that could only hold what it could hold. That night, Dad called to ask what a carol is, like the song, not the woman. "Do people still go door to door?" he asked. "Some do," I said. "You and Carol should lead a parade down the block." "Ha," he said soft. "We'll see." He sent me a photo later. Carol and Dad, at the front of a little cluster of neighbors in coats, mouths open like they were catching snow. The caption read, "We saw stars. I believed him." On New Year's Eve, the rec center let us host a small celebration for kids whose parents work late and the volunteers who have learned how to stretch a budget and an evening. We taped paper clocks to the walls and declared midnight at 9. Noor set up a playlist that would make every aunt in America complain and then secretly dance. Kinji emceed a raffle with a seriousness that made the grand prize, a graphing calculator, feel like a car. We counted down from 10, shouted Happy New Year like we were waking a sleeping giant, and blew into paper horns that tasted like cardboard. After we cleaned up, Bree leaned against the doorframe and said, "You realize this is your life now, right? Not a phase, a place." "I realize it some days," I said. "Other days I double-check." "Same," she said, and flicked off the lights. Outside, the night air held that rare quiet Austin gives you when it forgets itself. I loaded crates into the trunk, tucked myself behind the wheel, and sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, like a person at the starting line of something that doesn't require speed. If you're reading this from the middle, if the knock was recent, if the ask was outrageous, if the letter in the mail arrived with a weight you can feel in your wrists, here's what I know after 2 years of doing the next right thing until it added up. Your life is not a ledger other people get to balance. You are allowed to love, from a distance, measured in miles and laws and Friday night pizza. You're allowed to build tables with your name carved into the underside and invite only those who wipe their feet. Tell me what family is to you now, not what you were told it had to be. Tell me where you set your rope and who holds the other end without tugging. And if you're still inventing those answers, you can sit with us while you do. We've got folding chairs, extra pens, a dog who thinks you're wonderful, and a string of lights that looks like tiny moons.